Everyone is covering the launch. Every major outlet ran the story. Iran put a satellite into orbit. They mentioned the name. They mentioned the altitude. A few of them mentioned that the Revolutionary Guard was involved. And then they moved on. They moved on to the next story, because in their framework, this is a footnote, a provocation, another item on the list of Iranian misbehavior that Washington will eventually address. But what they are not telling you, what I am going to walk you through in the next 20 minutes with specific data and sourced analysis, is that this is not a footnote. This is a threshold event, and the reason it is a threshold event is simple. For the first time in this conflict, Iran now possesses a persistent, sovereign, real-time overhead surveillance capability that can track United States carrier strike groups, destroyer formations, and logistical support vessels from the moment they leave Bahrain to the moment they enter the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, and beyond. Think about what that means. Not in the abstract. Think about what it means in practice. Every movement, every formation change, every repositioning of naval assets in this region is now being observed, cataloged, transmitted in real time by a system that the United States cannot sanction, cannot hack without an act of war, and cannot shoot down without triggering exactly the escalation Washington says it wants to avoid. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to show you 3 announcements that the mainstream press missed entirely. I am going to show you why this satellite changes the military equation in ways that American naval planners are not publicly acknowledging. I am going to show you what Europe is quietly doing about it, what China already knew, and what the historical record tells us about what happens when a smaller power achieves surveillance parity with a larger one. And I am going to give you 3 specific predictions about what comes next. One of them will surprise you. Let us start with the basics, because the context here is essential and most people are missing it. The satellite Iran launched is designated Chamran-1. It was placed into a sun-synchronous low Earth orbit at an altitude of approximately 500 kilometers. To put that in perspective, the International Space Station orbits at roughly 400 kilometers. Chamran-1 is higher, which means a wider field of view per pass and a more stable thermal environment for its imaging sensors. It was launched aboard a Chem 100 solid fuel rocket, and this detail matters enormously because solid fuel rockets can be prepared for launch in hours, not days. Liquid fuel systems require lengthy fueling procedures that are visible to reconnaissance assets in advance. Solid fuel eliminates that warning window. The satellite was developed under the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force. According to reporting confirmed by multiple regional defense analysts and documented by Defense Security Asia, Chamran-1 carries a synthetic aperture radar imaging payload. Synthetic aperture radar, or SAR, is not a camera. It does not take photographs. It uses microwave pulses to construct high-resolution images of the surface below, and it does this regardless of cloud cover, regardless of darkness, regardless of weather conditions. Day or night, storm or clear sky, Chamran-1 sees what is below it. The IRGC Aerospace Force Commander, Brigadier General Amir Ali Hajizadeh, confirmed publicly that the satellite's primary mission set includes maritime domain awareness. That is the technical phrase. What it means in plain language is ship tracking, the tracking of ships. American ships specifically, because those are the ships currently operating in Iran's strategic neighborhood. This is not Iran's first satellite, but it is their first confirmed SAR-capable satellite with a stated maritime surveillance mission. That distinction is everything. And if you are just realizing that this changes the calculus in the Strait of Hormuz and the broader Gulf region, you are already ahead of most of the commentary you will find anywhere else today. Announcement number 1. The surveillance gap has closed. For decades, the asymmetry of this conflict has been understood in terms of firepower. Iran has missiles. The United States has carriers. Iran has drones. The United States has stealth aircraft. That framing, while not entirely wrong, misses the foundational layer underneath all military operations. And that foundational layer is intelligence, situational awareness, the ability to know where the enemy is before you act. The United States has operated with total surveillance dominance in this region since at least the early 1990 seconds. Carrier-based reconnaissance aircraft, signals intelligence platforms, persistent satellite coverage, undersea listening arrays, and forward-deployed radar installations on Allied territory have given American commanders what military planners call a recognized maritime picture of the entire Gulf region. Every Iranian vessel, every IRGC fast boat formation, every submarine departure from Bandar Abbas has been tracked, logged, and integrated into American operational planning. Iran, by contrast, has had to rely on shore-based radar, visual observation, coastal patrol assets, and whatever signals intelligence their ground stations could collect. In a conflict scenario, this asymmetry meant that American strike packages could reposition, redirect, and strike before Iranian commanders had a reliable picture of where those assets were. Chamran-1 does not eliminate that asymmetry overnight. Let us be precise. One satellite in a single orbital plane provides intermittent coverage, not continuous. At 500 kilometers altitude, a low Earth orbit satellite completes roughly 14 to 15 passes over any given point on Earth per day. Each pass is brief. The window over the Persian Gulf on any single orbit is measured in minutes, not hours. But here is what the mainstream analysis is missing. Iran is not operating one satellite. According to documentation compiled by the International Institute for Strategic Studies and cross-referenced with Iranian state media announcements, Iran has now placed 7 military and dual-use satellites into orbit since 2020. 7. The operational constellation, even a partial one, multiplies revisit rates dramatically, and Iran has publicly stated that the Chamran series is a program, not a single asset. A follow-on satellite is in preparation. Furthermore, according to reporting by The Telegraph and confirmed by multiple Western defense analysts, Iran has reached a data-sharing arrangement with Russia's Roscosmos and has access to supplementary imagery from Russian commercial platforms. Combined, this gives Iranian intelligence planners a coverage picture of U.S. naval movements that, while still inferior to American capabilities, is no longer negligible. Commander Daniel Dolan of the United States Navy, in a publicly available assessment circulated among defense policy institutes, described Iran's emerging surveillance architecture as, and I am quoting him directly, a layered denial and reconnaissance system designed to complicate American freedom of action in the Gulf. He was writing before Chamran 1. After it, that characterization understates the situation. Announcement number 2. The missile guidance problem is now solved. This is the part that the Pentagon has quietly acknowledged in fragments, and which I am going to connect for you now because nobody in the press is connecting it. Iran's most capable anti-ship missiles, the Nor series and the more recent Qadir system, are cruise missiles with terminal guidance capabilities. They are effective. They have been tested. But their effectiveness has historically been constrained by a critical limitation: target acquisition at range. A cruise missile launched from an Iranian coastal battery or a surface vessel can only strike what its guidance system can find. If the target is not precisely located at the moment of launch, the missile either misses or flies into open water. This is why American carrier strike groups have, until now, operated with a calculated confidence in their maneuverability. By staying in constant motion, by conducting unpredictable course changes, by maintaining electromagnetic emissions discipline, carriers and their escorts have been able to complicate Iranian targeting. Not eliminate the threat, complicate it. What Chamran 1 does, what the constellation of which it is a part does, is change the targeting chain fundamentally. Real-time SAR imagery transmitted to Iranian targeting systems means that the location of a carrier strike group, updated every pass, can be fed directly into missile guidance calculations before launch. The maneuverability that was previously a countermeasure becomes less significant when the launch system knows, to within hundreds of meters, where the target is and where it is headed. Bloomberg reported in March of this year that senior American naval planners conducted a classified wargame exercise focused on anti-ship missile threats in the Gulf and Arabian Sea. The exercise, according to 2 sources familiar with its findings, who spoke to Bloomberg on background, concluded that a coordinated Iranian strike employing current missile inventories combined with real-time targeting data from overhead surveillance would present, and this is the language used, a non-trivial threat to surface combatant survivability. That language, in military assessment vocabulary, is significant. Non-trivial means it cannot be dismissed. It means the threat is being taken seriously at the level of operational planning. Stay with me, because this connects to something even more important that almost nobody in the mainstream media is discussing. Iran has not deployed this capability in isolation. In January of this year, according to reporting by Reuters and confirmed by Pakistani regional officials, Iranian and Chinese defense ministers met in Tehran for what was described publicly as a routine consultation. The meeting lasted 9 hours. Routine consultations do not last 9 hours. What sources close to both delegations have described is a technical exchange that included satellite data protocols, specifically the formatting and transmission standards that would allow Iranian targeting systems to accept and process imagery data in real time, not with the multi-hour delays that characterized earlier generation systems. China already operates the Yaogan series of reconnaissance satellites, which include advanced SAR platforms. The technical standards China uses are now, according to those same sources, compatible with Iranian ground receiving stations. What this means in practice is that Iran's real-time maritime surveillance capability may, in certain scenarios, be supplemented by Chinese data. Whether China would actually provide that supplementation in a conflict is a political question. But the technical pathway exists, and that pathway did not exist 2 years ago. Announcement number 3, and this is the one that almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The satellite changes the deterrence equation, and it does so in a direction that makes de-escalation harder, not easier. Here is the mechanism. For deterrence to function, both sides need to believe that the costs of aggression outweigh the benefits. The United States has maintained its deterrence posture in the Gulf through the forward deployment of naval power. 2 carrier strike groups in the region constitute a statement: act aggressively, and you will face immediate, overwhelming conventional response. That statement is credible because the carriers are real, they are visible, and their firepower is undeniable. But deterrence also operates in reverse. Iran deters American first strikes to the extent it does through a combination of factors: the threat of retaliatory missile strikes, the ability to close the Strait of Hormuz, the capacity to activate proxy networks across the region, and crucially, the threat of anti-ship attacks that could damage or sink American surface vessels. The effectiveness of that deterrent threat has always depended on Iran's ability to credibly threaten American naval assets. A missile threat with no reliable targeting is not a deterrent. It is a gesture. With Chamran 1 and the constellation behind it, the missile threat has targeting. And a missile threat with targeting is a deterrent. The dangerous implication is this: American naval planners, who are professionals and who understand this logic, will now be under pressure to respond. Not by reducing forces in the region, but by increasing them or by accelerating the development and deployment of countermeasures: directed energy weapons, hypersonic interceptors, enhanced electronic warfare systems designed to blind Iranian surveillance passes. Each of these responses, when it occurs, will be read by Iranian planners as an attempt to restore the targeting disadvantage they have now overcome. And they will respond in kind. This is the escalation spiral that neither side officially wants, and that neither side on current trajectory is doing anything structural to prevent. The International Crisis Group documented in a briefing published last month that the current period represents, in their assessment, one of the highest risk intervals for unintended escalation in the Gulf since 2019. Chamran 1 raises that risk further, not because anyone wants war, but because both sides are now adapting their postures to a new surveillance reality. An adaptation under pressure, in compressed timeframes, with incomplete information, is precisely when accidents happen. Now let us talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are two stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The story they are covering is the familiar one: Iranian provocation, American resolve, the reliable cycle of statement and counterstatement. The State Department issued a measured condemnation of the launch. The Pentagon said it was monitoring the situation. Unnamed officials told wire services that the United States would respond appropriately to any destabilizing activities. This has not notably changed anything. The story they are not covering is the European story. France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, which constitute the E3 in Iran nuclear diplomacy, have privately communicated to Washington that they view the trajectory of American maximum pressure policy toward Iran with what diplomatic sources have described to Reuters as deep concern, not disagreement with American objectives. Deep concern about American methods. 3 consecutive weeks of back-channel communications, according to sources familiar with the exchanges, have centered on one specific question: whether the current American approach makes a negotiated settlement of the nuclear and regional security file less likely, not more. Think carefully about what this represents. When 3 of America's closest NATO allies, the original architects of the JCPOA diplomatic framework, communicate through back channels that they believe American policy is counterproductive, that is not nuance. That is not routine alliance management. That is a structural disagreement about strategic direction. And it is happening at precisely the moment when the surveillance equation in the Gulf has shifted. The European concern is not sentimental. It is economic. The International Energy Agency has documented that a sustained closure or serious disruption of the Strait of Hormuz would remove approximately 17% of globally traded oil from available supply. The IEA described the resulting price shock in their most recent scenario modeling as potentially more severe than the 1,973 oil embargo, more severe than the combined disruption caused by the war in Ukraine. The European economies, which are more import-dependent on Gulf energy than the American economy, understand that instability in the Gulf is not an abstract foreign policy problem. It is a direct economic threat. If you pay a gas or electricity bill anywhere in the Western world, what is happening in the Persian Gulf is not a distant foreign policy story. It is a bill that is either going to stay manageable or get very painful, depending on decisions being made in Washington, Tehran, and Beijing right now. Consider the Peloponnesian War. 2 great powers, Athens and Sparta, locked in a decades-long conflict over dominance of the Greek world. Both were formidable. Both were convinced that strength and patience would eventually produce victory. They fought from 431 to 404 BCE, nearly 3 decades. Both sides bled their alliances, exhausted their treasuries, and consumed their populations. Athens was ultimately defeated, but the real beneficiary of 30 years of Athenian-Spartan conflict was neither Athens nor Sparta. It was Macedon. Philip II and then Alexander the Great rose to dominance over a Greek world that had destroyed itself in mutual exhaustion, and they did so with relatively modest military investment compared to the forces Athens and Sparta had spent destroying each other. The parallel to the current situation is not exact, as historical parallels never are, but the structural logic is recognizable. The United States and Iran have been in a state of managed hostility for over 4 decades. Both sides have invested enormous resources in that hostility. Both sides have made domestic political calculations that make de-escalation domestically difficult. And while they have been locked in this cycle, a third actor has been quietly building leverage, infrastructure, and relationships across the region that neither Washington nor Tehran fully controls. That actor is China. China brokered the Saudi-Iranian Normalization Agreement in March 2023. China is Iran's largest oil customer, purchasing, according to the International Energy Agency, approximately 90% of Iran's exported crude. China provided, as Bloomberg reported and Trump himself confirmed in a moment of unusual candor, the diplomatic architecture for the ceasefire in the most recent Gaza conflict. China is now, according to the technical exchange described earlier, embedded in Iran's satellite targeting chain. The Peloponnesian analogy suggests a specific question that strategists should be asking. If the United States and Iran remain locked in escalatory competition, who accumulates leverage while they are occupied? The historical answer is almost always the party that was patient. The party that built quietly, that invested in relationships rather than confrontations, and that was positioned to mediate, profit from, or simply outlast the exhausted combatants when the cycle finally ended. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths because there is no honest middle ground in this analysis. Path 1. Diplomatic channel opens. This path requires 2 conditions: that the European back-channel pressure produces a genuine American policy review, and that Iranian leadership calculates that the leverage created by Chamran 1 is better used as a negotiating chip than as a deployed capability. In this scenario, track 2 diplomatic contacts, which according to sources familiar with the Oman Channel have been intermittently active, produce an agreement to discuss the satellite program's parameters as part of a broader regional security framework. The United States accepts temporary constraints on naval exercises in exchange for Iranian transparency commitments on the constellation. This path exists. It is narrow. I assess its probability at somewhere between 20 and 30% in the next 18 months, and that probability declines with every additional escalatory step. Path 2. Managed escalation. This is the path I believe we are currently on. Both sides continue adapting their postures. The United States deploys additional naval assets and accelerates countermeasure programs. Iran expands its satellite constellation and continues integrating its surveillance data with missile targeting systems. Neither side strikes. But the margin for error, the gap between normal operations and a catastrophic miscalculation, continues to narrow. A collision at sea, a drone interception that goes wrong, an accidental missile activation during an exercise, any of these could trigger an escalation neither side planned. This path is where the Peloponnesian analogy is most dangerous. Athens and Sparta did not plan 30 years of war. They planned short, decisive campaigns. What they got was attrition and mutual exhaustion. Managed escalation has a way of becoming unmanaged. Path 3, and this is the one I believe will matter most in the long run: strategic repositioning by a third party. If the current trajectory continues for another 12 to 18 months without resolution, the conditions will be set for a major diplomatic initiative from outside the bilateral US-Iran framework. China has already demonstrated in the Saudi-Iranian normalization and in the Gaza ceasefire that it is willing and capable of playing that role. A Chinese-led regional security framework that includes Iran, the Gulf states, and potentially Russia, and that offers the United States a face-saving off-ramp in exchange for reduced military posture, is not a fantasy scenario. It is a logical next step in a trajectory that Beijing has been building toward deliberately and patiently for years. Whether Washington accepts such a framework is the open question. The historical record of great powers accepting face-saving off-ramps is mixed. But the alternative, continued escalation toward a conflict that serves no one's economic interests and that destabilizes the energy infrastructure that underpins the global economy, creates powerful incentives for exactly that kind of initiative. Watch the satellite constellation, watch the naval exercise schedules, watch the European diplomatic calendar, and watch Beijing. Those indicators will tell you with far more accuracy than any press conference which path we are actually on. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, if Iran expands Chamran 1 into a full constellation of 5 or more SAR satellites, at what point does the American deterrence posture in the Gulf require fundamental recalibration rather than incremental adaptation? Second, is the European back-channel concern about American policy a temporary friction or the beginning of a structural divergence in transatlantic strategic thinking about the Middle East? And third, what does China do if Path 2 produces a military incident? Does it mediate? Does it stand aside? Or does it use the moment to accelerate Path 3? Tell me in the comments which path you think we are actually on. Tell me if you think the European back channel is more significant than the mainstream press is treating it. We will keep tracking every development in the Gulf, in the satellite domain, and in the diplomatic corridors that the cameras never enter. That is what this channel does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what is actually happening in the Persian Gulf and why it matters for all of us. Turn on notifications because the next update on this story is coming sooner than most people expect, and we will see you in the next analysis.